The sky over northern Germany was a ruin of gray steel and fire. At 22,000 feet, the air was thin enough to turn breath into knives, and yet inside the bomber, inside Fort Worth Babe, a B-17F of the 390th Bomb Group, every man was sweating. The raid on Bremen had gone wrong from the start. What was meant to be a textbook daylight precision strike on the Focke-Wulf plant had become a trap, sprung by radar-directed flak batteries and waiting squadrons of FW-190s. Captain Thomas Avery, the pilot, was 24 years old and had the face of a man who had aged decades in the span of minutes. His gloved hands trembled on the yoke as the fortress lurched through another burst of anti-aircraft fire. The smell of burning hydraulic fluid mixed with the sharp bite of ozone from shorted circuits. Every vibration in the airframe felt like an accusation, one more piece of proof that gravity was winning. Outside, the world was chaos in motion. Flak bursts blossomed in perfect black spheres around the bomber stream, thousands of feet apart, yet somehow always too close. Each one was an invisible dice roll of fate. Below, the Weser River wound through the smoke-choked city like a dark ribbon of calm amid destruction. The crew didn't look down, they only looked ahead. The first hit came without warning. A jagged chunk of shrapnel tore through the starboard wing root, shredding the control cables and setting the No. 3 engine ablaze. The plane kicked sideways. Lieutenant Avery's co-pilot, Frank Delaney, slammed his boot against the rudder pedal, shouting over the howl of the wind. "She's losing pressure, No. 3's gone." "Feather it!" Avery barked. "Feather and cut the fuel!" Delaney reached for the feathering button, too late. The propeller tore itself apart, flinging molten fragments into the fuselage. The explosion echoed through the aluminum shell like a hammer inside a bell. In the radio compartment, Sergeant Whitmore was thrown against the bulkhead. His headphones cracked in half, and a line of blood trickled from his temple. He could hear nothing but a high, constant ringing. Through the haze, he saw the waist gunner crawling toward the rear hatch, shouting something he couldn't hear. The fortress was bleeding from every seam. One engine down, then two, then three. They were over enemy territory, more than 200 miles from the North Sea. Altitude, 20,000 feet and falling fast. Avery's hands gripped the useless yoke. "We've lost hydraulics," Delaney said, voice flat, almost detached. "No control surfaces. She's dead." Avery stared out the cracked windscreen. The city's fires reflected off the glass like tiny infernos trapped in his eyes. "Not yet," he whispered. For a moment there was silence, only the wind screaming through torn metal and the labored breathing of 9 men who knew what that silence meant. Then, movement. The bomber rolled slightly, responding not to the controls but to the wind itself. Avery understood. The plane wasn't flying anymore. It was gliding, barely, an enormous piece of dying machinery coasting on faith and aerodynamics. Below them, German fighters circled like wolves. Their pilots could see the fortress slowing, its engines trailing smoke. Easy prey, yet none dove in immediately. The B-17, despite its wounds, still had teeth. Its 50 caliber guns bristled from every angle, each manned by trembling fingers waiting for the next attack. Sergeant Whitmore staggered back to his post, fumbling with the radio. The set crackled with bursts of static. "Mayday, mayday! Fort Worth, Babe! Hit over Bremen! Engines gone!" His words dissolved into interference. In the nose compartment, the bombardier, Paul Reynolds, sat staring through the plexiglass bubble. He could see other bombers limping home, their silver bellies catching sunlight through drifting smoke. Some trailed parachutes, tiny white flowers blooming in the cold air. Others simply vanished, swallowed by cloud and distance. Reynolds remembered something his father once said when he left for training. "You'll never really fly a plane. You'll ride it and pray it lets you live." He smiled grimly. The old man had been right. Minutes crawled. The fortress dropped through 15,000 feet. The temperature inside the cockpit began to rise as fire spread along the engine nacelles. The oxygen system hissed and failed. Avery tore off his mask and coughed against the stench of smoke. Delaney looked sideways at him. "We should bail out." Avery didn't answer. He was watching the way the wings flexed in the wind, reading their rhythm the way a sailor reads waves. "Not yet," he said again. "She's still talking to me." The others began to prepare. Chutes strapped, hatches cleared, but none jumped. Something about the calm in Avery's voice held them there. Then came the next horror. The final engine coughed twice, sputtered, and died. Propellers froze in eerie silence. No more vibration, no more thunder, only wind. 9 men now sat inside 40,000 pounds of dead aluminum falling toward enemy lines. The fortress began to yaw uncontrollably, drifting into a flat spin. Maps flew across the cockpit. A loose wrench slammed against the glass. The altimeter spun like a clock running out of time. Avery fought the useless yoke until his gloves tore. "Manual trim!" he shouted. "Try to balance her!" Delaney cranked the trim wheel furiously, metal grinding beneath his hands. Nothing. In the radio compartment, Whitmore was praying, half words, half static. The waist gunners clung to their mounts, trying not to vomit from the spin. The tail gunner's view was a whirling nightmare of cloud and fire. The B-17 fell through 10,000 feet. And then, something strange happened. The spin slowed, the nose dipped, the fortress leveled, just slightly. Gravity shifted from chaos to rhythm. Avery blinked. The plane had found equilibrium, not flight, but something close. The airflow, broken and uneven, was holding her up like invisible hands refusing to let go. Delaney's eyes widened. "How?" Avery's voice was low. "The wind. The wings are catching it, like a sailboat in a storm." They were gliding, falling, yes, but controlled, barely. They were heading northwest now, toward the North Sea. Whitmore re-established partial radio contact. "Base, this is Fort Worth, Babe. Lost all engines, no controls. Attempting glide toward water." His voice cracked. "We're still alive." The call went unanswered. At 8,000 feet, German fighters closed in. 3 Focke-Wulfs, painted black for contrast against the sky, appeared on the starboard side. They lined up for the kill. Avery ordered, "Gunners, stand by!" The right waist gunner, Corporal Jenkins, braced himself. His vision was blurred from smoke, but he saw the lead fighter diving in. He squeezed the triggers, tracers arcing through the air like comets. The German broke off. The other 2 came in from the rear. The tail gunner, barely conscious from oxygen loss, managed a burst, short, controlled. One fighter exploded in midair, scattering debris across the cloud bank. The second circled wide, then vanished. The fortress continued gliding, wounded but unbroken. Minutes became hours in their perception. No one spoke. Every sound, a creak of metal, a gust of wind, felt sacred, like the heartbeat of something ancient refusing to die. Through the cockpit glass, Avery could now see the faint shimmer of the North Sea far ahead. Sunlight glancing off its surface like glass, salvation and death in the same horizon. Fuel was gone, power gone. Yet somehow, the B-17 held altitude. The men began to believe. Delaney whispered, "If we can make the coast, maybe we can ditch near a fishing trawler." Avery nodded. "Hold her steady!" At 5,000 feet, they crossed the coastline. Below them lay a patchwork of green fields and dark water channels, the northern tip of Holland. Smoke drifted from burning farms. The radio sputtered again. A faint voice, English, distant, cut through the static. "This is RAF Coastal Command. Identify." Whitmore tried to reply, but the set died with a pop of burnt circuitry. Avery's focus never wavered. He felt the plane tremble beneath him, each vibration an echo of its final will. "Flaps won't respond," Delaney said. "Gears locked up." "Then we belly her in," Avery said softly. At 2,000 feet, the fortress began to sink faster. The glide was ending. The sea rushed up, gray, cold, merciless. Inside, the men braced. One crossed himself. Another kissed a picture of his wife taped to the bulkhead. Avery pulled on the dead yoke one last time, a symbolic gesture of defiance. "Hold together," he whispered, not to his crew, but to the plane itself. The water filled the windows. Impact was seconds away. The wind screamed louder until it sounded almost like a voice. And then, darkness, silence. The sea consumed them. No one moved for several seconds, then coughing, shouting. They were alive. The fortress floated, miraculously, on her belly, half submerged, wings broken but still attached. Avery unclipped his harness. "Everyone out," he ordered. "Move!" One by one, they climbed through the top hatch into freezing air and smoke. Life rafts deployed, half torn but functional. They dragged themselves clear as the bomber slowly sank, her nose dipping under the gray surface like a dying leviathan returning to the deep. Whitmore looked back, eyes wet and red. "Fort Worth, babe," he murmured. "You got us home." The plane slipped beneath the waves, leaving only a trail of bubbles. They had glided 42 minutes, without engines, without controls, over enemy territory, guided only by instinct, wind, and a refusal to die. The horizon was empty except for the endless churn of the North Sea. Somewhere beyond it lay England. The sea was not kind. Waves rolled in from the northwest, tall as walls, carrying the smell of oil and cold iron. The men of Fort Worth Babe clung to their half-inflated rafts, shivering beneath a sky bruised with evening clouds. The bomber was gone, swallowed whole, but her ghost still seemed to breathe beneath the water, an invisible pulse that kept them from surrendering. Captain Avery sat at the edge of the raft, his gloves soaked and stiff. Every few seconds, he scanned the horizon for aircraft. Nothing but gulls and wind. His body ached from the impact. His ribs felt cracked, his face burned from salt and smoke. Yet he said nothing. He couldn't afford to. Commanders weren't allowed to feel pain, only direction. Sergeant Whitmore had saved the emergency radio. Its battery was weak, its antenna bent, but it was alive, barely. He cradled it like a newborn. "If Coastal Command heard our last signal," he said, his teeth clattering, "they'll be looking, maybe even now." Delaney gave a humorless chuckle. "Or maybe we're floating in German waters and it won't be the RAF that finds us first." Silence fell. The North Sea had a way of silencing men. It stripped away bravado, left only breath and heartbeat. Avery checked his watch. 1842. They had been down less than 20 minutes. Dusk was coming fast. In an hour, darkness would turn the sea into a void. The crew's faces were gray, lips blue, but their eyes still held a spark of disbelief, a kind of stunned reverence. They had lived through the impossible. A 4-engine bomber with no power, no controls, gliding for 42 minutes. Not even the manuals accounted for that. Delaney muttered, "How the hell did she hold together?" Avery didn't answer. He remembered the last seconds, the plane trembling, wings flexing like lungs breathing their final air. "She wanted to live," he said quietly. They floated in uneasy silence. Somewhere in the distance, thunder muttered, low and constant, like artillery beyond the horizon. The wind shifted northward, carrying with it the faint smell of land, peat, and salt grass. Whitmore fiddled with the radio, coaxing it to life. Static, then a broken voice. "Repeat, all air-sea rescue units, Bremen sector, search pattern, over." "Say again," Whitmore yelled into the receiver. "This is Fortress crew, Fort Worth Babe, ditched northwest of Bremen. 9 survivors, request rescue." Static swallowed his words. Then the signal died completely. No one spoke. Time crawled. The sun slid lower, staining the sea copper, then crimson. Each wave caught the dying light like liquid metal. They drifted westward, carried by a slow current. Avery thought of home. Indiana fields in summer, a porch swing creaking, his mother humming, "Bless 'em all." He hadn't thought of that song in years. It came to him now, unbidden, like something from a life before war. Delaney broke the silence. "Sir, what if no one finds us?" Avery turned, met his co-pilot's eyes. "Then we keep our heads above water until someone does." "And if the Germans get here first?" Avery looked out over the endless gray. "Then we're prisoners, but alive." The wind rose again, sharper now, carrying flecks of icy spray. Waves slapped the rafts, their rhythm heavy and relentless. Reynolds, the bombardier, coughed hard, his voice hoarse. "Feels like the sea's taking attendance." Whitmore checked the radio again. Nothing but silence. The battery was dying. The last of their flares were wet. The cold began to creep deep into their bones, not sharp but numbing, like an invisible weight pressing them down. By nightfall, the sky turned black and featureless. Stars began to appear, one by one, fragile and distant. The men huddled closer. Delaney whispered, "You ever notice how quiet war gets after it's tried to kill you?" Avery smiled faintly. "Quiet's the sound of mercy." Hours passed. The horizon was a line of darker shadow against the dark sea. Occasionally, a plane droned far above, just sound, never light. The crew raised flares anyway, praying someone might see. Each burst of red light vanished into the mist like a dying thought. By midnight, exhaustion set in. The men dozed in turns. Avery stayed awake, staring at the stars, charting their slow movement across the sky. He tried to calculate drift, north by northwest, maybe 30 miles from the Dutch coast by now. If the current held, they might reach the shipping lanes by dawn. If. Then faintly he heard it. A hum, low, rhythmic. Not wind, not waves. Engines. He sat upright, scanning the darkness. Whitmore stirred. "What is it?" "Engines," Avery said, "to the east." They listened. The sound grew, a low drone, steady, mechanical. A patrol craft, maybe. Or worse. Delaney's voice was tight. "Could be German. Could be British," Avery countered. They waited, breath held. The sound drew closer. Then a beam of light cut across the sea, a white cone slicing the mist. It swept past once, twice, then fixed on them. A voice through a loudhailer, harsh, guttural, German. Whitmore cursed softly. "Kriegsmarine." The searchlight brightened. A gray hull emerged from the darkness. A German minesweeper, small, fast, its deck guns glinting under starlight. "Stay calm," Avery said, hands visible, no sudden moves. They were hauled aboard by sailors in black coats, rifles ready. The Germans were young, some barely older than the Americans they captured. The officer in charge, a blond lieutenant with cold eyes, examined their insignia. "B-17, he said in accented English. "You are far from your bombers, yeah?" Avery nodded once. "We ditched, engines out." The lieutenant raised an eyebrow. "No engines, no controls, and still alive. Then perhaps God flies for you." The men were disarmed, their tags checked, and given rough blankets. The Germans were efficient, but not cruel. War had stripped away hatred, leaving only procedure. The minesweeper turned east toward the coast. Below deck, the Americans sat in silence. The rhythmic thump of engines echoed like a heartbeat, an irony none missed. After 42 minutes of silence in the air, that steady sound now felt almost comforting. Delaney leaned against the bulkhead. "Guess we're guests of the Reich." Avery nodded, for now. They arrived at dawn. The ship docked in a small harbor north of Emden, a gray town smothered in fog. The prisoners were marched through the quiet streets. Civilians watched from doorways, expressionless. To them, these were not enemies, just another group of broken men swept up in the machinery of war. By midday, they were on a train heading south toward a Luftwaffe interrogation center. The landscape outside blurred by flat fields, church spires, the occasional crater. Avery stared out the window, eyes distant. For the first time since the fall of Fort Worth Babe, the weight of it began to sink in. The fortress had defied physics, death, and logic. She had carried them farther than anyone could explain. And now she was gone, resting somewhere beneath the sea, silent as history itself. At the interrogation camp, the men were separated. Questions came fast. Unit, target, route. Avery answered with practiced restraint. The German officer across the table seemed more curious than hostile. "How did you glide so far?" he asked. 40 minutes. No engines. Impossible." Avery looked at him evenly. "You tell me, Captain. You saw what we did to your factories. Maybe the impossible just takes longer." The officer smiled thinly, then ended the session. Days turned into weeks. The men were eventually sent to Stalag Luftfern, a POW camp on the Baltic coast. Barbed wire, watchtowers, the dull rhythm of survival. Yet within those fences, something rare happened. Stories spread. Other airmen, captured from other missions, began to hear of Fort Worth Babe, the fortress that refused to die. Each retelling grew slightly different, but the core remained. A dead plane gliding 42 minutes through flak and fire, her crew carried home on faith and wind. Whitmore began to keep a small log, scribbling on scraps of paper. "If we ever make it back," he said one night, "they'll never believe us." Avery replied, "Then we'll make them." Winter came. Snow fell across the camp like ash. In the distance, the war's thunder grew louder, the Allies advancing from the west, the Russians from the east. Each rumble of artillery was a promise that the world outside still turned. One night, under a blood-red sunset, Avery stood at the fence, staring toward the sea. Somewhere out there, beneath the cold gray waves, lay the wreck of their bomber. He imagined it resting in silence, its wings splayed like arms, its nameplate glinting faintly in the darkness. Fort Worth Babe. He whispered to it, as if the sea could carry his words home. "You did your part. We'll finish ours." A gust of wind swept across the camp, cold but not cruel. For a moment it almost sounded like engines. Liberation came not with trumpets but with footsteps, muddy, cautious and human. In April 1945, as the German front crumbled under the twin pressure of the Allies and the Red Army, the guards at Stalag Luft 1 simply stopped shouting. One morning they were there. By nightfall, they were gone. The prisoners woke to silence so complete it felt unnatural. No roll call, no orders. Only the crackle of distant gunfire carried on the wind. Captain Thomas Avery stood at the edge of the compound, frost glittering on the wire. Beyond it, the Baltic Sea gleamed faintly under a gray dawn. For months he had stared at that same horizon and imagined freedom as something far away, almost mythic. But now it was near enough to smell. The salt, the thawing mud, the diesel smoke of approaching vehicles. When the Soviet troops arrived, they were suspicious, hungry, and exhausted. They did not cheer. They studied the Americans with hollow eyes, as if unable to decide whether these men were real. Yet within hours, cigarettes were exchanged, hands shaken. The war's machinery, after years of devouring men, was finally spitting them back out. Avery and his crew were sent to a temporary Allied camp near Lübeck, then flown to England aboard a C-47 transport. As the plane rose above the coast, Delaney leaned toward the window, eyes wet. "Feels strange," he murmured. "Flying again?" Avery nodded. Different sky, same ghosts. Below them, Europe was a patchwork of smoke and ruin. Rivers glinted like veins through a body scarred by fire. The men said little. They were thinking of the ones who hadn't come back, the bombers that vanished without a trace, the names already fading from chalkboards in squadron huts. At Thorpe Abbott's, home base of the 390th, the surviving crews gathered when they returned. The air smelled of oil and spring rain. The control tower still stood, windows patched, its radios alive with new missions for new crews. War had no pause button, not even for miracles. The men of Fort Worth Babe walked into the operations hut like ghosts who'd stumbled back into the world of the living. Conversations froze. Someone dropped a pencil. Then, slowly, applause filled the room. Not the loud kind, but a steady rhythm of disbelief and respect. Major O'Donnell, the group's commander, met Avery with a long stare before speaking. "You should be dead," he said simply. Avery smiled faintly. "So should the plane." O'Donnell nodded, handed him a cup of coffee and said nothing more. Some stories didn't need words. In the following weeks, debriefings turned into disbelief. Engineers examined the flight data and scratched their heads. A B-17 couldn't glide 42 minutes with 4 dead engines and no control surfaces. It was aerodynamically impossible. Yet the crew's accounts matched perfectly. Compass headings, descent rates, timing, all consistent. The report vanished into classified archives under the label anomalous survivability. But among the airmen, it became legend. They called it the Ghost Glide, a phrase whispered with reverence in ready rooms, written on mess hall walls, etched into memory. The crew dispersed with the war's end. Some went home to small towns and quiet lives. Delaney returned to Boston, married his wartime sweetheart, and never flew again. Reynolds, the bombardier, became an aeronautical engineer, trying to explain with mathematics what faith had already proven. Whitmore stayed in the Air Force, rising to Master Sergeant, still carrying the scar on his temple from Bremen. And Avery, he returned to Indiana. For a while he worked his family's farm, rising before dawn to watch the mist roll off the fields like smoke from an invisible front line. But he could never quite let go of the sky. On summer evenings, when B-29s from a nearby base passed overhead, he would stop his tractor, look up, and imagine that steady vibration through his boots, the heartbeat of flight, the sound of his old command still somewhere above him. In 1951, he visited England again, now as a civilian. He drove to Thorpe Abbotts, the old base quiet and overgrown. The runways were cracked, weeds pushing through. The control tower was a hollow shell, its walls peeling, but it still smelled faintly of oil and hope. Avery walked the perimeter alone, hands in his coat pockets, until he reached the far edge of the airfield. There, half buried in the soil, he found a fragment of aluminum, curved, pitted, with a faded trace of olive drab paint. He turned it over. The faint outline of a letter. B. He stood there for a long time, listening to the wind. Later, in a small village pub, an elderly farmer told him that fishermen sometimes spoke of a wreck far out in the North Sea. "They say she lies upright like she landed gentle," the man said. "Engines gone, wings still spread. Locals call it the Silent Lady." Avery smiled, his eyes distant. "That's her," he said. "That's Fort Worth Babe." He left the pub and walked down to the shore. The tide was out, the sand cold beneath his boots. The sky was the same shade of gray it had been that day over Bremen. He imagined the bomber beneath the waves, quiet, resolute, still holding its course. He thought of his crew, scattered across states and time zones, each carrying the same invisible burden, that impossible 42 minutes. It wasn't just survival. It was something larger, something wordless, a defiance that lived beyond reason. He took a deep breath of salt air and whispered into the wind, "You kept your promise." The waves rolled in, erasing his footprints. Years later, when the story finally surfaced in post-war interviews, historians debated it endlessly. Some called it luck. Others pointed to structural anomalies, unique airflow, or the peculiar balance of damage. But among pilots, it became more than a story. It became a parable. Because every man who ever sat in a cockpit knew that moment when machinery gives out, when the math stops working, when death waits patiently below, and yet something unseen keeps you aloft. It wasn't faith in miracles. It was faith in each other, in steel and courage, bound by the thin thread of sky. In 1972, a Royal Navy sonar team confirmed the wreck's location, 40 miles off the Dutch coast, resting at a depth of 150 feet. The fuselage was remarkably intact, the wings still attached, the name painted faintly across the nose, Fort Worth Babe. Divers reported an uncanny stillness inside, as if the sea itself respected her. Instruments frozen in place, oxygen masks dangling, control cables still severed. No corrosion near the cockpit, just the faint outline of two seats side by side, pilot and co-pilot, unchanged after 30 years. When the report reached Avery, then in his 50s, he read it twice and set it down without a word. He walked out onto his porch that evening and watched the sunset, red at the edges, gold in the center, the kind of sky only a bomber crew would recognize as flying weather. He closed his eyes and heard it again, the low hum of engines, the rattle of wind through torn metal, the soft voice of Delaney beside him saying, "She's still talking to me." A smile crossed his face. "Still are," he whispered. The years took him quietly. When he passed, the local paper wrote only, "Captain Thomas Avery, veteran airman, survived 25 missions over Europe." It did not mention that he and his men had once defied gravity itself. That belonged to memory, not headlines, but in museums and airfields. Among restorers and historians, the legend endured. Pilots visiting the 390th Bomb Group Memorial still speak of the Fort Worth Babe, the fortress that flew without power, the ship that refused to fall. And sometimes on still days over the North Sea, fishermen claim they can hear a faint sound under the waves. Not the echo of surf or wind, but a steady, rhythmic thrum, like engines idling far below. Perhaps it's just the sea playing tricks. Or perhaps some machines, like some men, never really stop flying.